It's time for the Your Personal Bank Show with Ferenc Toth. In an era of chaos, confusion, and craziness, Ferenc is a voice for common sense. As a financial literacy educator, speaker, and entrepreneur, Ferenc cuts through the noise to help us understand how current events affect our money, economy, and our freedom. Now, here's Ferenc Toth.
Welcome to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ferenc. If you want to reach me, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com, or you can go to the Your Personal Bank app. Yes, you will reach me. It's yourpersonalbank.com. I do hope you and your loved ones had a very Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Looking forward to a great 2026. I get this question all the time, but especially the beginning of the year, folks are thinking about the year, planning, and that question is quite simple. What do you think is going to happen? And that's a very difficult question to answer, frankly, because you're really predicting the future. But there's some general trends we can certainly look at, and I will do my best to look at the big picture on what my best guess is likely going to happen for this year. So I'm going to encourage you to stay tuned. Before I get to that, though, I have so many things to cover because the last couple of weeks with the Christmas and New Year's, 2 weeks ago, I shared my personal story. I got into more personal details than I think I ever have. So if you're interested in finding out more about my background, all the way from my childhood, all the way to where I am currently, what brought me here, what caused me to think the way I do, again, you can go to the Your Personal Bank app or yourpersonalbank.com. You can listen to this or any of the previously recorded shows, and you can learn more about me and my background. Last week, I shared my annual goal-setting message, including the Wheel of Life. That has become very popular. It's something I've shared now for over 20 years. It started out as a goal-setting session, the first of each year, with my agents, my sales team. And I would always ask them, our first meeting of the year, if they wanted me to share that. And even though many of them had heard it multiple years prior, it was unanimous, and they asked me to share it again with a few additional insights each time. It was a great time of year to set goals, focus on what this year is going to bring for you. There's so much that's going on. I really need to touch on this. And I think, first of all, the new year is really kicking off by a focus on fraud. There's a citizen journalist named Nick Shirley who posted a video that has gone completely viral. Well over 100 million people have viewed this. It's really having quite the impact. And the focus of this video, if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to go to YouTube or X. You'll find it there. It's about a 45-minute, in-depth, investigative podcast. I think you'll find it very, very interesting. I don't often recommend these types of things, but occasionally there's a do not miss message that you really should hear. So if you have not seen Nick Shirley's documentary on the fraud that has been occurring in Minnesota, you really should do yourself a favor and watch it. And the focus of this fraud was primarily on the Somali community in Minnesota, and it demonstrated how millions in taxpayer money is vanishing into sketchy shell companies, while many normal Americans are just breaking their backs to afford groceries. And the fraud is so obvious, it's absolutely ridiculous. Nick Shirley shared a message and a warning, and he said, if there's no real accountability on this, people are going to explode. As he stated, we work too hard not to know where our money is going, and they work for us. He's referring to government and government employees, not the other way around. And he's absolutely correct in that. The primary issue that's going on is many of the Somali community have started daycare centers, quote unquote. They've been funded by taxpayer dollars. They're receiving taxpayer dollars for taking care of children. Yet, as you will see in this documentary video, that there are no children there. He even meets and discusses with a number of these supposed business owners, and even talks to some neighbors who live in the area, and many of them state they've never seen a child go in or out of these buildings in years, literally. And the poster child of this is a daycare called the Leering Center. It's so obvious. It's on the sign on the building. It says supposed to be the Learning Center, but it's misspelled the Leering Center. And they're supposed to have 99 students. They received $1.9 million last year for these students. Yet again, there's a neighbor that has lived there for the past 8 years across the street from this Leering Center, supposedly learning center, and he stated he's never ever seen anyone come in or out of the building, much less children. Now understand, the money for these daycare centers are supposed to be for low-income children. The funds are a combination of state and federal funds, so every taxpayer is contributing to this to a certain point. An assistant U.S. Attorney, Joe Thompson, who has been investigating this, states that about $18 billion has been paid out to 14 programs to Minnesota since 2018. They've flagged all of these as high risk. And this is a quote from U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson. "The fraud is not small. It isn't isolated. The magnitude cannot be overstated. It is staggering industrial-scale fraud. It's swamping Minnesota and calling into question everything we know about our state." Many are pointing out that this could be one of the largest fraud operations in the history of the United States. They're going on and stating where this is literally nothing less than organized crime. The only way this type of fraud, this level of fraud can occur is there has to be many people involved with many layers in the governments to allow this to happen. As the documentary points out, the state of Minnesota does little or no accountability. They just write checks. When Nick Shirley was asked in an interview if Governor Tim Walz knew, the governor of Minnesota, his response was it was almost impossible for him not to know, especially the level of the fraud. And asked why little or nothing was done about it to stop this, which apparently has been going on for years, some say even for a decade plus, as he pointed out that Tim Walz and other politicians want votes. The Somali community in Minnesota votes overwhelmingly Democrat as a bloc. It's incredibly obvious that they pander to that group, and the politicians didn't want to interfere with that voting bloc so they could retain power. Again, this is fraud that's organized on an industrial scale. Whistleblowers have come out and stated that they warned both Governor Walz and the state attorney general, and not only did they do nothing about it, but they actually retaliated against the whistleblowers. What were the fraudsters doing? Well, when they were brought in to the United States, there are a number of non-governmental organizations, not only gave them assistance, food, housing, clothing, apparently they connected them with small business loans and gave them instructions on how to start these businesses, primarily these daycare centers. And then checks were sent out for services. Clearly, we're let in on the fact that the government organizations would provide little or no oversight, which would allow them to continue these fraudulent schemes. I mean, just common sense to understand why else would they know to do all this and know they could get away with it at this level literally for years. The good news is there's a number of investigations that have been started. The federal government is getting involved. I believe we're going to see significant RICO-style violations. RICO, again, is a set of laws designed to combat organized crime, and there's really no other way to define this but organized crime, but frankly, even worse, because not only is the crime organized, but it's also facilitated by many in power, both in bureaucracy and elected officials. There's no other logical way. It defies common sense that this could have been allowed to happen, again, for so long and at such a scale without willful negligence at best and active participation at worst. The encouraging part about this, it has now gained the public's attention. Many people in prominent positions have brought this up, including the Vice President of the United States. So I don't think this one's going away, and that's good news. But it's becoming increasingly clear that this is just a small piece of a huge problem. The Department of Health and Human Services recently pointed out that Medicaid programs made more than $200 million in improper payments to healthcare providers in 2021 and 22 for people who had already died. This was according to the Inspector General in the Office of Audit Services. Steps are being made, like sharing Social Security database, to reduce this fraud in the future. The Social Security trustees themselves have reported that Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid are running out of money and are likely to do so in less than a decade. Well, as you look at more and more of this fraud at stupendous levels, frankly, I got more to share. If they can eliminate much of this fraud, a lot of the shortfalls in Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid will be alleviated, and that's huge. There were rental assistance programs, including payments to dead tenants and non-citizens, according to a new HUD report. Turns out HUD found over 30,000 deceased tenants getting taxpayer funds in fiscal year 2025, and this is according to the HUD's agency financial report. A large concentration of the funds went to New York, California, and Washington, D.C. Automation connected with the U.S. Treasury database is now being applied to better find problematic payments. So not only are they finding these things, but they're taking steps to fix it for the future. This is good news. But one of the key things we're finding from many of these fraudulent activities that are occurring is that these scandals are exposing massive social service fraud. And although Minnesota has been in the news, it's California that has the biggest numbers. Some of these frauds are, frankly, at breathtaking scale, yet you have other states like Florida and Texas that are thriving and not having anywhere near the fraud levels that, say, a Minnesota or California has. The California State Auditor recently estimated that a stunning $72 billion may have been bilked from taxpayers in various social service fraudulent programs. They pointed out that social services appear to be the heart of all the alleged theft. And this brings us to a bigger point, and it has to do with the size and role of government. What we're finding that many of these blue states that offer significant levels social services funding are now awash in fraud, while other states like Florida and Texas, for example, are not. And even West Virginia, a historically economically depressed state, just saw its credit rating increase over the past year. Why? A simple answer is that there's simply more money to steal. California, for example, spends about $7,600 per resident, while Florida comes in at about $5,000 per resident. And it's now coming out that much of the gap or the difference is accounted for by blatant fraud. Blue states provide more and more levels of social assistance and welfare, such as paying people to be home health aides, providing care for youth, yet no money is spent to increase oversight. So in other words, no one's watching the taxpayer dollars. There's no accountability. This brings us to the bottom line. Bigger government invites more fraud. Smaller, leaner, accountable governments does not. It's a basic philosophical difference, and one our founding fathers understood significantly. But if you do want to contact me to learn how to increase your returns, increase your liquidity, reduce your market risk, reduce your taxes, unlimited upside potential gains with no downside risk, accounts indexes that have historically averaged in double digits over the past decade plus, contact me at yourpersonalbank.com. Stay tuned in the next segment because I have a lot of other things to share that I think you're going to find extremely interesting. Concerned about market risk? I'm Ferenc Toth, host of the Your Personal Bank Show. The S&P 500 valuations are higher than at any time ever recorded in stock market history. This includes 1929 and 1999. We all know what happened afterwards. It wasn't pretty. Elevated valuations increase risk to the downside. Annuities and Your Personal Bank offer unlimited upside with no downside market risk. Your principal is guaranteed. Contact Ferenc at yourpersonalbank.com to maximize returns, reduce market risk, increase liquidity, and reduce taxes. I'm Ferenc Toth, host of the Your Personal Bank Show. This is the golden era of fixed assets. Annuities and guaranteed lifetime income are paying the best rates in over 40 years. If you looked at annuities over 2 years ago, the numbers have increased significantly. If you own an annuity over 2 years old, the new products can not only pay your penalty to switch, but are often guaranteed to outperform your current product. For more info, contact me at yourpersonalbank.com or 866-268-4422. That's yourpersonalbank.com.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ferenc Toth. Want more information? Contact Ferenc at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ferenc Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ferenc. If you want to reach me, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com or on the Your Personal Bank app. Yes, you will reach me. It's yourpersonalbank.com. 2026 is kicking off with a bang, and a lot of it has to do with fraud. Minnesota has been grabbing much of the media's attention recently because of the tremendous, massive levels of fraud that's being found through fraudulent daycare centers, for example, in the Somali community. It's estimated now that of the $18 billion of total funds spent, both state and federal, in the state of Minnesota over the last few years, upwards of half of that, or about $8 to $9 billion, has been fraudulent. This could turn out to be one of the largest organized crime efforts in the history of the United States. That's how big this is. But what caused this? Why are we here? Why did it even happen? Well, first of all, it started by bringing in a number of people from around the world that don't have the same culture, ideals, society. It would be naive to think that fraud is not common or even accepted in many cultures around the world, unlike here in the United States. These kinds of ideas and cultures are not compatible, frankly. And to make matters worse, there are entire government agencies and non-governmental organizations dedicated to helping income refugees sign up for welfare benefits immediately, things like cash assistance, food stamps, housing aid, mortgages, business loans. And recently, we even saw a letter signed by many American Catholic bishops calling on a reduction of deportations. And I think many Americans would be more accepting of the letter if this had not been the fact first. See, it turns out Catholic Charities USA, which is an umbrella charity for Catholic relief agencies across the country, has been one of the largest players in primarily illegal immigration. Catholic Charities USA revenue this past year included a $1.4 billion government payment, taxpayer funds. Many of the Catholic charity chapters near the border receive federal grants to provide migrant shelter and travel assistance. Now, they insist their mission was humanitarian, yet the scale of government funding underscores its key role in handling illegal immigrants. See, we didn't see a letter or any condemnation from the Catholic bishops when they were facilitating millions of illegal aliens across the border and giving them food and shelter and transportation. Now, there wasn't a peep. The religious argument is, well, we should treat people the same and humanitarian and all this. I understand that, and as a Christian, I understand that. But that also ignores another part of the Bible, an entire book, in fact. The entire book is about Israel rebuilding the wall around Jerusalem. Well, guess what, folks? That's a border. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 43 states, "Foreigners who live in your land will gain more and more power while you gradually lose yours." And Proverbs 22:28 states, "Do not move the ancient boundary which your fathers have set." This is a clear warning, and there are other verses stating that you should respect the boundaries of a country. So I'm sorry, these Catholic bishops are cherry-picking verses out of the Bible while ignoring others. And I hate to say this, but it sure seems like the reason they're doing that is primarily motivated by money. You see, they were getting paid by the government to house and transport illegals. There's no financial benefit for them if they leave. And that's a sad reality. To make matters worse, National Counterterrorism Center Director Joe Kent recently stated that his department has identified about 18,000 known and suspected terrorists that the Biden administration let into our country over the past 4 years. These are the ones they know of, folks. And the Wall Street Journal recently came out with an article stated the biggest fraud in welfare. You see, the government gives tens of thousands of dollars in benefits to the poor, which it doesn't count as income. The article points out that real federal welfare spending has soared by 765%, more than twice as fast as total federal spending, and now costs about $1.4 trillion annually. The Wall Street Journal states that were the money simply doled out evenly to the 19.8 million families the government defines as poor, each household would receive more than $70,000 per year. This is the level of waste and fraud that we are experiencing. The HUD Secretary Scott Turner stated that 59% of illegal alien families use one or more welfare programs in our country. And this is despite the fact that there is federal law that forbids immigration for anyone that would be a public charge. Yet if you look at the welfare recipients in the state of Minnesota, for example, it turns out that 81% of Somali immigrant households receive some form of welfare. While native households, these are native-born Americans, it's only 21%. And even for Somali immigrant households who have been in the United States for 10-plus years, 78% of those households are still receiving some form of welfare benefit. See, welfare is not supposed to be a lifestyle. It's supposed to be there to help somebody out who's down on their luck. But it's also not supposed to be available for those who have come from another country, legally or otherwise. Federal law prohibits that. Yet we're seeing billions of dollars literally going out to this. And to put things in perspective, native-born Americans in the state of Minnesota use some form, only 21% use some form of welfare, 4 times less. This extreme level of waste and fraud on these social programs has an economic impact. And here's one of them. Do you know that 60% of rental demand in America during the Biden administration was foreign-born? This is according to FHA. And 50% of FH loans with U.S. government tax credits were given to foreigners. Why is the U.S. taxpayer helping contribute and fund mortgage loans, non-citizens, when we have a housing shortage, a housing crisis, and a housing affordability problem? You see, this stuff has real economic impact, folks. You wonder why housing's so expensive? I think we're getting to the bottom of what's really going on. You see, here's something that a lot of people still don't realize. Illegals in America have been getting bank loans, mortgages, insurance, driver's license, free health care, at least in California and New York, and in-state college tuition. And the questions being asked is, well, what's the point of being a citizen if an illegal gets all the benefits but doesn't have to pay taxes or do any jury duty? And I saw this, and at first I found it a little hard to believe until I confirmed this with a couple of my clients who happen to be mortgage brokers. See, some people say, well, illegals can't buy homes without a Social Security number. Well, they're dead wrong. And I've confirmed this. It turns out there's a rule from 2010 under the Obama administration that allowed something called ITIN loans. This means you could buy without a Social Security number, and the Biden administration kept it in place. So, folks, the reality is millions and millions of dollars have gone to funding mortgages, taxpayer dollars through FHA and other sources to fund mortgages for illegals, while at the same time we have a housing crisis and a housing shortage. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't ever remember voting for mass admission of tens of millions of people from third world countries, oftentimes, many of them illegal. And I sure never voted for paying for all of their living expenses, food, clothes, housing, business loans, mortgages. Is anyone out there starting to feel betrayed by their elected leaders? I know I sure am, and I hope a lot of other people are feeling that way. Well, in fact, I know they are. And you know, if you remove immigrants from failed third world systems, a lot of things improve, not just the housing affordability. Test scores for schools in the United States have been declining for the last couple of decades. Well, do you realize that if you take out the immigrants from third world countries, legal and illegal, test scores shoot up? If you take them out of the healthcare system, the strain on it plummets, availability increases. If you take them out of public safety data and violent crime virtually disappears. You see, if you bring people in from failed societies into our country, they're basically going to replicate where they came from. I mean, if Somalians, for example, can't make Somalia successful, why do you think they would make the United States successful? That's a harsh reality, but it's true. And could you imagine if we started shipping hundreds of thousands of Americans into China or Iran, India, Mexico? Pick a country. What do you think would happen? And then we also demanded welfare payments, driver's license, subsidized housing, the right to vote, new laws that make it illegal to criticize how we're taking over their countries. I mean, that's just insane, isn't it? Yet that's what we're asked to do. And on the surface, this may sound harsh, but it's a harsh reality. If someone's truly an Arab refugee and they're trying to seek asylum, it would be best for both them and the country if they seeked asylum in an Arab country, because they would fit into that society better. African refugees should seek asylum in another African country. Hispanic, Latin refugees in a Hispanic or Latin country. You see, you got to ask yourself a simple question. Why is it America's job to provide asylum to the entire third world? Surely these people can find asylum in another country that's more culturally similar to theirs. It would be an easier transition, more beneficial for them and their country. And if those countries don't want to take them or refuse to, well, then that's all the more reason for us to refuse that also. If you want to contact me to learn how to navigate the volatility that I believe we'll still be facing for a while, reduce your market risk, reduce your taxes, increase your returns safely. We have indexes that average over 10% plus returns over the past decade plus with no downside risk. Contact me at yourpersonalbank.com. Now, I've touched on the illegal issues, but there's some issues with legal immigration also that cannot be ignored that affect us economically. So stay tuned. This is Ferenc, host of the Your Personal Bank Show. Your Personal Bank is a financial concept that allows you to grow your money insured with guarantees, income tax-free, and highly liquid. Also, you have the potential to continue to earn interest on money you invest in other assets, purchase items, or pay expenses. How can you do this? First, invest in a high cash value policy to earn dividends. If you leave money in the policy, it'll grow like any investment, insured with guarantees and tax-free. Second, we establish a bank line of credit using the cash in the policy as collateral. When you access funds, you receive them from the bank. Typically, dividends earned are higher than the interest charged by the bank. You keep the difference. This is known as positive arbitrage. If you want to earn interest on money you spent or invest elsewhere, contact me at yourpersonalbank.com or 866-268-4422 for more info. That's yourpersonalbank.com.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ferenc Toth. Want more information? Contact Ferenc at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ferenc Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ferenc. If you want to reach me, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com or the Your Personal Bank app. Yes, you'll reach me. It's yourpersonalbank.com. So I've been discussing a lot of the factors and fraud, tremendous industrial levels of fraud we're seeing due to a lot of illegal immigration and some legal. But here's some other issues and fraudulent issues we're seeing on the legal immigration side. And this needs to be curtailed also. Recently, FedEx won a multi-billion-dollar federal delivery contract, and they turned around and used the funds to hire foreign workers through their H-1B1 visa program. Publicly available immigration data shows a substantial increase in FedEx's hiring of foreign workers, and many of the listed salaries for these positions by non-Americans range from about $100,000 to $115,000 per year. I firmly believe that many Americans would be happy to take that job if it was offered. But as we've discussed before on this show, many companies prefer foreign workers because under many of these visa programs, the very presence of that person is dependent upon their job. So if they lose their job, they have to go back to their home country. And this gives the company a tremendous level of control over that employee. Also, because of that, they can often offer that job at a discount they would have to pay a U.S. citizen, oftentimes 20-30% less, And many of these visas also do not require the company to pay any payroll tax. So when you add up all those benefits to the company, why would they hire a U.S. citizen? It financially makes no sense. The incentive structure for that needs to change. That's what would stop this. California recently hired H-1Bs for PE teachers. You can't tell me that they're Americans, U.S. citizens who can't blow a whistle, run laps, or teach dodgeball. I mean, that's not a labor shortage. It's a wage and policy problem. There's not employee shortages. This shortage that the many companies are referring to, it's just malpractice. And again, the financial incentives are for them to hire the foreigner, not the citizen. That needs to be reversed. And to see another blatantly fraudulent system, legal immigration, is that now, according to the Wall Street Journal, many Chinese billionaires now have dozens of U.S.-born babies via surrogates. One video game executive, Zhu Bo, is said to have more than 100 children born in the United States. It turns out what they do is they pay a surrogate, typically through IVF, and then when that woman is near her due date, they fly her to the United States and have the baby born in the United States, and they immediately become a U.S. citizen. So now these Chinese billionaires have multiple kids with U.S. citizenship, U.S. passports, etc. Now, if that isn't a fraudulent practice and you still believe in birthright citizenship for anyone, I'm sorry, I'm not on the same page as you are. And I guess the overall point is here, a lot of people say, well, there's no election fraud out there. The people that are robbing and cheating and stealing and fraudulent every single government program they can get their hands on, they wouldn't cheat in the election. That's sacred. Here's the reality. The election fraud is worse than you think. The welfare fraud is becoming obviously worse than you probably think. The illegal immigrant invasion has been worse than you know. The market manipulation is probably worse than you know. And the whole corrupt system is starting to become more and more exposed. That's the good thing. Here's another bit of good news. DOGE recently cleaned up 12.3 million scammers from the Social Security system. These were people who were receiving Social Security aged 120 plus. Now, as far as we know, there's no one in the United States who's age 120. If they were, they'd be in the Guinness Book of World Records. Yet, Social Security was paying over 12 million people each and every month that their birth date was 120 plus. Now, if the average Social Security check that was going out to those people was just $1,800 a month, that means DOGE just saved Americans $22 billion per month from Social Security. That's just the people who are obviously defrauding the system. What about all the other fraud? I think what needs to happen is the fraud needs to be cut out. Government is spending about 50% more than it did pre-COVID. Yet our total population has increased about 2% during that time frame, or at least that's the official numbers. Why do we need a 50% increase in spending when we only have a 2% increase in population? I'm increasingly suspecting that most, if not all, of that 50% increase has been fraudulent. And if we could just get back to pre-COVID levels or close to it, that would actually balance the budget. That means the government would stop spending more than it receives. And I'm also beginning to believe that much of the $38 trillion in debt is due to fraud. If you had to ask my guess, it would have to be easily half, if not more. So if we could just cut the fraud significantly in government spending, Social Security would be on a solid footing financially, so would Medicare and Medicaid, and our government debt would become manageable again. It would solve a tremendous amount of financial problems for this country. And that's why I applaud some of the actions that we're starting to see. In fact, recently, the Trump administration is requiring sponsors to pay back the money that migrants receive through taxpayer-funded benefits, like welfare and health care. Now, this isn't a new law they've passed. It's actually a pre-existing law that was not enforced during the Biden administration. The problem isn't with our laws. The problem is the lack of enforcement. It goes back to the 1996 welfare reform, which turns out to be the Clinton administration. Sponsors like Catholic Charities, as I discussed earlier, sign a form called an affidavit of support. They enter a legally binding contract to reimburse the government for any benefits received by the sponsored migrant. Covered benefits include Medicaid, SNAP, SSI, and other programs administered through the Department of Health and Human Services. Now, this obligation remains until the migrant becomes a U.S. citizen, accrues 40 quarters of qualifying work, departs the country permanently, or dies. Agencies can demand repayment directly from sponsors, like the Catholic and Lutheran Charities and others, with options to pursue legal action for noncompliance, including recovery of costs and fees. And this move makes sure migrant sponsors, not American taxpayers, should cover support costs, preventing public resources from being used when private commitments exist. This is tremendous. If the Trump administration truly pursues this law that's been on the books since 1996, this could be a game changer and ensure the programs like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, etc., will get back to more solid footing. There's no reason why our social programs should be strained at the level they are, especially given the fact that the cause is coming from people who have come into this country, legally or otherwise, been sponsored by many of these non-governmental organizations and agencies, frankly, fraudulently, and they're on the hook for it legally. This is interesting. I'm going to keep a close eye on this. And another change because of this tremendous amount of fraud that's been uncovered in Minnesota, the Small Business Administration has just cut off all SBA funding, that's the Small Business Administration, to the state of Minnesota effective immediately. I don't know if we've ever seen an agency cut off an entire state, but this is a move in the right direction. The SBA administrator stated that they uncovered over $500 million of fraud within days of investigating Minnesota and noted that the state officials built an industrial-scale crime ring to rip off hardworking Americans. They're freezing all grant funding to the state in order to stop rampant waste of taxpayer dollars and uncover the full depth of the fraud. These are steps in the right direction. And the larger point is this. If we look at the Somali community, that approximately 80% are on welfare programs, 78% even after a decade, where they're supposedly refugees, right? And by definition, shouldn't the expectation be they should go home eventually? I mean, since when did refugee mean you permanently live here on welfare, creating fraudulent criminal organizations, and be a parasite on the system? Refugee status means you're here for a while until things get better in your own home nation or maybe somewhere else you can go, and then you go there. See, this is completely the opposite to the Ellis Island era immigration that many like to portray. Those people didn't sneak in from third world countries. They assimilated. They worked hard. They didn't live on taxpayer welfare. For one, it didn't exist. And every single person that came in to the United States was given a full physical exam and personally sat down with an immigration officer before they were allowed into the country. They also were required to have a profession, and they needed to be able to read English. It was a well-known fact that many during that era were afraid of catching diseases like whooping cough or others while they were on the ships coming over because they knew that if they were ill, they would be rejected at Ellis Island and would be sent back. That was some of their greatest fears. See, that's common sense immigration. We need to go back to the basics. How much longer are we, the people, going to allow fraudsters and corrupt politicians to rob us blind with our own taxpayer dollars? Most Americans work hard, save, invest, take out loans, do it yourself, side hustles. Government grabs a chunk of our income and then gives it straight up to fraudsters and waste. And no one's held accountable. I agree with Nick Shirley. If some things don't change and change in a big way, one of my predictions are we're going to see a massive uprising, perhaps even a revolution. I'm not talking about violence, but I am talking about massive change, which I'll explain further in the next segment. Contact me at yourpersonalbank.com if you want to learn how to mitigate risk, weather the volatilities, thrive in it that's likely coming, reduce your market risk, and reduce your taxes, increase your returns. We have index strategies that have averaged over 10% average annual returns for over a decade with no downside market risk. Contact me at yourpersonalbank.com for more information. Stay tuned in the last segment. You're not going to want to miss it because I'm going to share a few of my predictions for 2026.
This is Ferenc, host of the Your Personal Bank Show. My show focuses on creating tax-free buckets of money, insured, guaranteed, highly liquid, and the ability to create positive arbitrage. Did you know this is the best time in over 40 years to invest in index annuities? An index annuity allows you to 1. Grow your money safely without market risk. Once gains are locked in, they're guaranteed against future market loss. 2. Double-digit potential upside on good market years with no losses in bad years. Principal is guaranteed. 3. A 7 to 8% fixed interest option is available in the first year. If you're interested in growing your money with potential index-related gains without downside market risk, this is the best time in over 40 years to consider an annuity. If your annuity is over 2 years old, the newer products likely have far superior potential returns. Please contact me at yourpersonalbank.com or 866-268-4422 for more info. That's yourpersonalbank.com.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ferenc Toth. Want more information? Contact Ferenc at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ferenc Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ferenc. If you want to reach me, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com or the Your Personal Bank app. Yes, you will reach me. It's yourpersonalbank.com. So I've been discussing the rampant fraud that's being uncovered, much of it around the immigrant community, both legal and otherwise, some of the economic impacts, and how I think it's going to impact 2026. I want to start touching on some of that. The typical U.S. citizen works hard for their money. They get taxed on it through various numbers of ways: income tax, sales tax, property tax, etc. And then that money gets wasted and defrauded, much of it, by our federal government and many state governments, some local. And it's not only these illegal immigrant schemes or the Somali daycare centers or the Catholic and Lutheran charities, non-governmental organizations to facilitate illegals through housing and transportation. Also much of it goes to foreign aid. Do you realize that there are 193 recognized countries in the world, and currently 177 of them receive U.S. taxpayer money? That's over 91% of the world. It's not Congress's money. It's not the U.S. government's money. It's your money. It's my money. It's our kids' money. Government has no money. It comes from us, the taxpayer, or they print more and cause more inflation. The lack of audit control is the problem in federal and state governments. It's alarming. More and more people are calling for stop taxing us until you can count for every penny. Elon Musk has even come close to stating that our entire national debt exists because of money laundering, while those that are guilty of doing it are trying to collapse America on purpose. This isn't an accident. The real question isn't whether corruption exists. I think any rational person understands that. The corruption and the fraud that we're seeing uncovered is on levels that are hard to fathom. But the real question is, why is it allowed to keep happening in plain sight? If this was truly about protecting taxpayers, we'd see investigations, indictments, accountability by now. Instead, we're getting speeches, fundraising emails. And at some point, people have to ask a simple question. Is the system broken, or is it working exactly as designed? One of my predictions, likely for 2026, is wait until the younger generation figures out that the reason they can't get ahead isn't due to the boomers. You see, the boomers have been often blamed for housing unaffordability, for example, and things like that. But it turns out the real reason, much of it at least, is because the government's generational theft of our money. And at some point, we have to stop asking who needs to pay more taxes and start focusing on where the heck all of this money is going. And a lot of people are looking for a monumental event to spark a revolution or change. We saw the Reagan Revolution, for example. Many of you are old enough to remember that, where it was a significant political change, and it changed the direction of our country. It didn't happen when young men were stabbed at track meets or when young women were stabbed on public transit. It didn't happen when a future president almost got assassinated. It didn't happen when millions crossed our borders. Where it might happen is where enough people step up and say enough already and stop paying their taxes. Now, I'm not calling for this. I'm just predicting what I think likely is going to happen. I'm seeing an upswell of this sentiment. Fighting against unjust taxation is what helped form the United States in the first place. Remember the Boston Tea Party? Taxation without representation. More and more people calling for, you know what? Let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to the basics. What created this country in the first place? And here's some good news about all that. Our founding fathers, they had to go to war to obtain their freedom from Britain. Taxation without representation. But they won that war. And then, secondly, they created a system to put the people in control, a representative republic. The problem is not our system. In fact, they created the best system in the history of mankind. More freedom and more prosperity has been created by this system than any other in the history of mankind. That's an undeniable fact. The problem is we've had too many people just not pay enough attention. Evil thrives when good people do nothing. When the Constitution was first created, Ben Franklin was famously asked, "What type of government do we have?" His response was, "A representative republic if you can keep it." The Federalist Papers and many other documents back up what he meant. It took an educated electorate to maintain a representative republic. That's from Thomas Jefferson. John Adams stated that our form of government was wholly unsuited to anything but a Christian country. One of the first acts of Congress was a call to prayer. And what we're seeing is a return to faith, which creates more free thought. Instead of people just following groups or what they're told to do by media or whatever, more and more people are starting to think independently, much like they did in the founding era. One of my predictions, I believe, is that we're going to see a return to the basics. And no, not everybody will come around to that line of thinking, but it doesn't take everyone. It just takes a majority, right? 51%. And yes, I understand there's fraud in the electoral process, but many of these actions being taken by the current administration will make it more difficult for fraud to occur. In the last election in 2024, I found it incredibly embarrassing that a country of our caliber had a common saying of too big to rig. That's an admission that fraud is rampant in our system. See, the system isn't the problem. It's the people that are currently in power, or the majority of them at least. We're experiencing the largest organized criminal organization probably in history. Much like the mafia, but worse because many of these people actually hold positions of power. But if enough people recognize this, the elected official for their district, for their state, nationally, whatever, is looking out for themselves more than we the people, we have a mechanism to remove them through the electoral process. Now, it's not going to happen overnight. For example, it takes 6 years to get rid of a senator. And this problem wasn't created overnight, so we're not going to fix it overnight. But I do believe we're on the right path. And if we continue to do that and more people wake up to that fact, the future is pretty encouraging. Last few thoughts. Predictions for 2026. Even if these things do happen, there's going to be some volatility. There's going to be challenges. There's going to be people that are going to fight this. They're not going to give up this level of power easily. I've used the analogy, they're like ticks on a dog that are dug in. But we also have some other challenges. And I think the greatest prediction I can probably make for 2026 is volatility and an increasing likelihood of a correction, probably significantly. Why do I say that? There's no question in the last couple of years, AI has driven the markets. One of the biggest problems with AI is energy. I'll give you an example. Texas has received requests for 226 gigawatts of data center power just in the past year. The entire state runs on 85 gigawatts. ERCOT, which is one of the electrical companies in Texas, their queue is nearly quadrupled in 12 months. And 73% of that increase is data centers. This is the largest build-out in American history. Now, in the long run, this could be a tremendous build. But of the 226 gigawatts requested, only 7.5 gigawatts are actually connected and operating. 57% of the queue has not even submitted planning studies. And the electric company has basically called this laughable. His estimate for what actually gets built by 2030 is 20 to 30 gigawatts, or about 10% of what is in the queue is what's being requested. So what's going to limit AI growth is the power needs, at least in the shorter term, over the next few years. Longer run could produce some real economic positive impact, so expect volatility. The other big problem, total consumer credit hit a record of over $5 trillion in October of 2025. Revolving credit, which includes credit cards, is over $1.3 trillion, which is one of the highest levels ever recorded. Typical Americans are heavily in debt. That's a weak financial position to be in. Housing has never been more unaffordable. That's a problem. Job growth is weakening. That's one of the biggest measures to look at for housing prices and economic output. This is why U.S. consumer sentiment has never been this depressed since the Great Depression. That's often a predictor. All at the same time, market concentration is still surging. The top 7 stocks now reflect 36% of the S&P 500. That is not healthy. It's 13% higher than the peak of the dot-com era. And assets that are leveraged in the market, it's never been this extreme. And that's why some are stating we could be heading for a massive recession. I don't know if that's certainly going to happen or not, but the risk certainly is there and is increasing. My best recommendation, protect your downside. The volatility could be massive, could be significant. Corrections could be also. We have index products that have unlimited upside potential, no downside risk, have averaged over 10% returns for the past decade plus. Why keep your money at significant risk when you can protect the downside? Yet, if it continues to go up, which is also a possibility, you can gain from that. And if we do get a correction, guess what? You can reset at the lower number and then benefit from the recovery when it does occur. Because I believe in the longer run, 2 to 5 year period, if we see a correction, we'll most likely see a recovery. I'm not pessimistic about the long-term future. I'm concerned about the shorter term. That would be my best estimate or prediction for 2026. I wish you all a happy and prosperous new year. Stay tuned next week to the Your Personal Bank Show for great information. As long as it's on our money, in God we trust.
Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. This show is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information. The presenter and guests of this program do not engage in legal, accounting, or tax advice. Professional advice regarding your situation should be sought if required.
Concerned about market risk? I'm Ference Toth, host of the Your Personal Bank Show. The S&P 500 valuations are higher than at any time ever recorded in stock market history. This includes 1929 and 1999. We all know what happened afterwards. It wasn't pretty. Elevated valuations increase risk to the downside. Annuities and Your Personal Bank offer unlimited upside with no downside market risk. Your principal is guaranteed. Contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com to maximize returns, reduce market risk, increase liquidity, and reduce taxes.